At my granddaughter's wedding, I noticed my name tag said, "The old lady who's paying for everything." I smiled when I read it. I even pinned it carefully onto my navy blue dress as if it were perfectly normal. But something inside me became very quiet after that. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and let me know where you're watching from, because what happened that night changed the way I saw my family forever. I had spent nearly 3 months helping plan Olivia's wedding. 3 months of florist appointments, catering deposits, seating charts, dress fittings, and late-night phone calls where Vanessa somehow always sounded exhausted right before mentioning another expense. The ballroom at the Grand Crescent Hotel looked beautiful that evening. Crystal chandeliers glowed warmly against ivory walls. Tall arrangements of white roses stood beside every table. A string quartet played softly near the dance floor while guests sipped champagne beneath golden lights. It should have felt magical. It should have felt like family. I arrived 20 minutes early because I've always believed important occasions deserve punctuality. My late husband Robert used to say that arriving early showed respect for the people you loved. Even after 3 years without him, I still heard his voice in little moments like that. I wore the pearl earrings he gave me on our 40th anniversary and the navy silk dress Olivia once told me made me look elegant. I wanted to look nice for my granddaughter. At 68, you start noticing how invisible older women can become in crowded rooms. But that night, I still believed I belonged there. The young woman at the check-in table smiled politely when I gave her my name. "Of course, Mrs. Carter," she said cheerfully before handing me a cream-colored name card attached to a gold ribbon. I glanced down casually at first. Then I read the words again. "The old lady who's paying for everything." My fingers froze around the card. Around me, glasses clinked softly. Someone laughed near the bar. The violinist continued playing as though nothing had happened. For one strange second, I wondered if maybe I had misunderstood it. Maybe it belonged to another table. Maybe it was part of some wedding joke I didn't understand. But then I noticed the girl behind the table suddenly avoiding my eyes. Her smile faltered for only a second before she looked down at her clipboard. "Is everything all right?" she asked quietly. I could have made a scene. I could have demanded another card. Instead, I smiled gently and said, "I'm sure it's fine." Then I pinned it onto my dress myself. Because when you reach a certain age, you learn something painful about humiliation. The loudest humiliations are rarely shouted. They arrive wrapped in laughter. They hide inside jokes. They sit politely at dinner tables and wedding receptions wearing expensive perfume and tasteful jewelry. I walked into the ballroom slowly, feeling the weight of those words resting against my chest like a stone. A few guests glanced at the tag as I passed. Some looked uncomfortable. Others smirked before quickly looking away. Near the champagne tower, I spotted Vanessa immediately. My daughter-in-law stood surrounded by guests in a silver gown that glittered beneath the chandeliers. She looked radiant in the practiced way some women do when they know exactly how much attention they're receiving. When her eyes landed on me, her lips curled into a bright smile. "Evelyn," she called warmly, crossing the room toward me with their kisses and perfectly manicured hands. "You made it." I kissed her cheek lightly. I wouldn't miss Olivia's wedding. Her eyes dropped briefly toward the name tag pinned to my dress. Just for a second, I saw it. Satisfaction. Small. Sharp. Gone almost instantly. "Oh, good," she laughed softly, touching my arm. I was worried they might have mixed up the seating cards again. Again. Not apology. Not embarrassment. Just enough explanation to make cruelty sound accidental. Before I could answer, 2 women beside her glanced down at my tag and laughed into their champagne glasses. One whispered something I couldn't hear. Vanessa smiled wider. Across the ballroom, my son Richard stood near the bar speaking with several business associates. He looked directly at me, directly at the name tag. Then he looked away. The ballroom suddenly felt colder after that. Not physically. The chandeliers still cast warm golden light across the marble floors, and waiters still floated between tables carrying trays of champagne and crab cakes. But something inside me had shifted. It was as if someone had quietly opened a hidden door and allowed me to see my family clearly for the first time in years. I moved toward my assigned table near the back corner of the room, not close to Olivia and her new husband, not near the family tables beside the dance floor. My seat sat beside the service doors where hotel staff disappeared in and out carrying dirty dishes and empty glasses. Every few minutes, cold air drifted in whenever the kitchen door swung open. I ran my fingers lightly over the folded napkin resting beside my plate. Table 19. Furthest from the bride. Furthest from the photographs. Furthest from the important people. A younger version of myself might have convinced herself it was accidental. But age teaches you to recognize patterns, especially painful ones. I watched guests greet Vanessa with admiration as she floated through the ballroom, accepting compliments as though she personally built the entire evening with her own two hands. "This wedding is incredible," one woman told her near the cake display. Vanessa laughed modestly. "Well, when someone else is paying, it is easier to dream big." The women around her chuckled politely. One glanced toward me, then toward the name tag still pinned neatly against my dress. I lowered my eyes to my untouched champagne glass. Richard finally approached nearly 20 minutes later. My son looked handsome in his black tuxedo, though there were deeper lines around his eyes now than I remembered. For a moment, seeing him standing there almost softened something inside me. I remembered the little boy who used to run into my bedroom during thunderstorms carrying his blanket behind him. I remembered school science fairs, baseball games, late nights helping with homework at the kitchen table while Robert made hot chocolate for both of us. I remembered every version of my son except this one. "Mom," he said quietly, adjusting his cufflinks. "You look nice tonight." Nice. Not beautiful. Not elegant. Just nice. I smiled faintly. "Thank you." His eyes flickered briefly toward my name tag before sliding away again. "Vanessa said there was some mix-up with the cards." "Did she?" He nodded too quickly. "You know how these hotel staff can be." I looked at him for several seconds without speaking. The quartet continued playing somewhere near the dance floor, while silverware clinked softly around us. Richard shifted uncomfortably beneath my silence. Finally, I asked, "Do you think it is funny?" His jaw tightened slightly. "Mom, please do not make tonight difficult." "Not, I am sorry. Not, this should not have happened. Just do not ruin the evening." Something inside my chest grew very still after that. Richard exhaled softly and lowered his voice. "Olivia is stressed enough already. Vanessa worked really hard on this wedding." I almost laughed hearing that. Vanessa had certainly worked hard collecting invoices. The floral designer alone had cost nearly $12,000. The ballroom rental was another $18,000. I knew every number because every bill eventually found its way to me. It always had. When Richard lost money opening his restaurant 15 years ago, Robert and I covered the debt quietly. When Olivia needed tuition for private college, I wrote the checks without hesitation. When Vanessa wanted a larger kitchen during their home renovation, somehow my retirement savings became part of the conversation. Every emergency, every dream, every rescue, always wrapped in phrases like "family helps family." Richard touched my shoulder lightly before stepping away again. "Just enjoy the wedding, Mom." I watched him disappear back into the crowd beside his wife. Across the ballroom, Vanessa threw her head back laughing while two guests read my name tag aloud between themselves. One of them actually pointed at me while smiling. I picked up my champagne glass carefully before anyone noticed my hand trembling. Dinner service began shortly after that, though calling it dinner somehow made the evening sound warmer than it really was. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly, while waiters moved between tables placing plates of filet mignon and roasted vegetables in front of guests who barely paused their conversations long enough to thank them. Somewhere near the dance floor, Olivia laughed brightly during photographs with her bridesmaids. Her white gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers exactly the way she had dreamed it would when she was little. I remembered sitting beside her on my living room couch when she was 9 years old, flipping through bridal magazines while she circled dresses she liked with a pink marker. "Mine will have flowers everywhere, Grandma," she told me once. "And a giant cake." Back then, she still reached for my hand when she crossed parking lots. Back then, she still looked happy to see me. I cut a small piece of steak, but could not bring myself to eat it. Every few minutes another guest glanced at the words pinned to my chest. Some smiled awkwardly. Others looked amused. No one looked surprised. That was the part one could not stop thinking about. They had all accepted this humiliation as normal before I even walked into the room. Vanessa stood near the head table, speaking loudly enough for half the ballroom to hear her. "Weddings are unbelievably expensive now," she sighed dramatically while adjusting the diamond bracelet Richard bought her last Christmas. Thank goodness Evelyn insisted on helping. Otherwise, we would have had to scale things down. Helping. Such a soft word for financing nearly every detail of the evening. I stared at the candle flickering in the center of my table while memories surfaced quietly one after another. The $10,000 deposit Vanessa called me crying about last spring. The emergency florist payment when she decided ivory roses looked cheap under ballroom lighting. The custom invitations imported from Italy because Olivia wanted something timeless. Every single time, I said yes. Not because they pressured me. At least not directly. I said yes because I love my family. Because Robert and I spent our entire marriage building something stable enough to support the people we cared about. Because mothers and grandmothers are expected to give without keeping score. A burst of laughter near the bar pulled me back to the room. Vanessa was speaking with two women I vaguely recognized from her country club. Honestly, she laughed while sipping champagne. Evelyn would probably fund a royal wedding if we asked nicely enough. One of the women smirked. Well, at least she is useful. They laughed again, quietly, casually, as if they were discussing the weather instead of another human being sitting 20 feet away. I lowered my fork onto the plate carefully. Across the ballroom, Olivia finally noticed me watching. For a brief moment, our eyes met. I waited for something. Embarrassment, sympathy, even discomfort. Instead, she gave me a tight smile before quickly turning back toward her photographer. That hurt more than Vanessa ever could. Children learn cruelty somewhere. They inherit it slowly, like habits or expressions. Richard approached the microphone shortly after dessert was served. The room quieted as he tapped his champagne glass gently. I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight, he began warmly. Guests applauded softly. Vanessa rested her head against his shoulder while cameras flashed around them. Richard thanked the wedding planner, the hotel staff, Vanessa's parents, Olivia's college friends for helping organize the bridal shower. Then he smiled proudly toward Vanessa, and especially my amazing wife, who worked tirelessly to make this evening perfect. More applause followed. I sat very still waiting for my name to appear somewhere inside that speech. It never did. Not once. When Richard stepped away from the microphone, Vanessa leaned toward one of her friends and whispered something that made them both laugh while glancing directly at me again. I could not hear the entire sentence over the music, only the end of it. Without her guilt money, Vanessa murmured softly, "None of this happens." The music grew louder after the speeches ended. Guests drifted toward the dance floor carrying champagne flutes, while photographers gathered family members beneath an arch covered in white roses and hanging candles. I remained at table 19 beside the swinging kitchen doors, listening to silverware clatter somewhere behind me while laughter rolled across the ballroom in warm waves that no longer felt meant for me. A waiter stopped beside my chair and quietly asked whether I wanted coffee with dessert. I almost thanked him for speaking to me more kindly than my own family had all evening. "Just coffee," I said softly. He nodded and disappeared toward the kitchen. I watched Olivia move through the crowd in her wedding gown while guests reached for her hands and complimented her beauty. She looked radiant, young, untouched by the when I returned to the ballroom. Everything looked the same at first glance. The chandeliers still glowed softly above the dance floor. Olivia and her new husband swayed slowly beneath strings of white lights while guests gathered around them, holding champagne glasses and smiling for photographs. Vanessa stood near the center of the crowd in her silver gown, radiant beneath the attention she worked so hard to collect. But now I saw the room differently. It was strange how quickly illusions collapse once someone hands you the truth. I walked back to table 19 and sat down quietly beside the flickering candle that had nearly burned itself out. The name tag still rested against my chest. The old lady who was paying for everything. Earlier that evening those words had humiliated me. Now they simply sounded desperate. Cruel people often reveal more about themselves than their victims. I folded my napkin carefully onto my lap and watched my family celebrate around me as though nothing had changed. As though they had not spent the evening peeling away the last pieces of respect they once pretended to have for me. Vanessa approached my table about 10 minutes later carrying another glass of champagne she clearly did not need. Her cheeks were slightly flushed now, her smile looser around the edges. "There you are," she said brightly. "You disappeared for a while. We were beginning to think you left." "We. Always we. Cruel people rarely stand alone." I smiled politely. "I just needed some air." She glanced toward my untouched dinner plate before lowering herself gracefully into the chair across from me. "You really should enjoy yourself tonight, Evelyn. Olivia only gets married once." The sentence sounded Harmless. Almost kind. But there was something underneath it. A warning disguised as politeness. I looked toward Olivia across the ballroom. My granddaughter was laughing during photographs with her bridesmaids while photographers adjusted lights around her. She looked beautiful, young, untouched by consequences. She does look happy, I said softly. Vanessa followed my gaze before leaning closer toward me. Well, this wedding cost enough. Her smile widened slightly. Thank goodness someone in this family still believes in generosity. I noticed then that she was waiting for a reaction, waiting for hurt. Some people enjoy emotional bruises the way children enjoy pulling wings off insects. I simply smoothed the sleeve of my dress calmly. Generosity only matters when people appreciate it. For a brief second, something sharp flickered behind Vanessa's eyes. Then she laughed lightly as if we were sharing a private joke together. Oh, do not be dramatic. Dramatic. Such a convenient word. Women use it against older women all the time once kindness becomes inconvenient. Vanessa reached for my name tag playfully, touching the edge of it with one manicured finger. Honestly, people love this. Everyone keeps talking about it. I noticed. It was Olivia's idea originally, she said casually before taking another sip of champagne. But I may have encouraged it. The words settled quietly between us. I looked at her for several seconds without speaking. Across the ballroom, Richard finally noticed us sitting together. His expression tightened immediately. He started walking toward our table. Too late. Vanessa kept smiling. Come on, Evelyn. You know it is true. None of this would exist without your checkbook. Richard arrived beside us, just as she finished speaking. Vanessa, he said sharply under his breath. She waved him off dismissively. Oh, relax. We are teasing. Richard looked exhausted suddenly. Older than he had earlier that evening. He glanced toward me carefully, almost cautiously, as though trying to predict whether I would embarrass them publicly. What fascinated me most was not their cruelty anymore. It was their certainty. They truly believed I would absorb every insult quietly forever. Because I always had. Richard lowered his voice. Mom, please do not let tonight become uncomfortable. There it was again. Not concern for my feelings. Concern for their evening. Their image. Their celebration. I looked at my son for a long moment before asking softly, would this wedding still exist without my money? Silence settled over the table instantly. Even Vanessa stopped smiling for half a second. Richard exhaled heavily. That is not fair. I nodded slowly. No, I said quietly. It really is not. The conversation at the table ended there, at least on the surface. Vanessa stood first, smoothing her silver gown with irritated little movements before forcing another bright smile onto her face. Well, she said lightly, I am going to check on Olivia before cake cutting. She leaned down and kissed Richard's cheek while completely ignoring me. A moment later, she disappeared back into the crowd, laughing too loudly at something one of the bridesmaids said near the dance floor. Richard remained standing beside my chair for several seconds after she left. He looked uncomfortable now in a way I had not seen all evening. Uneasy, cornered, like someone slowly realizing the room temperature has changed, but not understanding why. Mom, he said quietly, Vanessa has had a stressful week. She did not mean anything by it. I looked up at my son calmly. Then what exactly did she mean? He opened his mouth, closed it again. Around us, guests gathered near the enormous white wedding cake, while waiters lit tiny candles across nearby tables. The band had started playing softer music now, warm jazz drifting gently through the ballroom. Everything still looked elegant from the outside. That was the strange thing about family humiliation. It often unfolds beneath beautiful lighting. Richard finally pulled out the chair beside me and sat down heavily. Can we please not do this tonight? He asked quietly. I noticed then how tired he looked. Not guilty. Tired. There is a difference. Guilty people want forgiveness. Tired people simply want consequences delayed. I folded my hands neatly together on the tablecloth. Do what, Richard? Interrogate us. Make everything uncomfortable. I almost smiled hearing that word again. Uncomfortable. As though discomfort had only just entered the room tonight. As though I had not spent years swallowing it quietly at birthdays, holidays, graduations, and family dinners whenever Vanessa decided I was useful enough to invite, but not important enough to respect. Richard rubbed his forehead slowly before speaking again. Vanessa jokes sometimes when she is nervous. Does Olivia joke that way too? He looked at me sharply then. That question landed exactly where I intended it to. Across the ballroom, Olivia stood near the cake table smiling for photographs, while Vanessa adjusted the train of her wedding gown carefully for the cameras. Perfect mother of the bride. Perfect family. Perfect delusion. Richard lowered his voice further. Olivia did not think it would upset you this much. I stared at him quietly. Then neither of you know me at all. That seemed to affect him finally. His shoulders dropped slightly, as though something heavy inside him had shifted. For the first time all evening, he looked directly at the name tag pinned against my dress instead of pretending not to see it. I told Vanessa it was probably too much, he admitted softly. But she said it was harmless. Harmless. Another interesting word. People rarely call something harmless unless part of them already knows it is cruel. Before I could answer, the microphone near the dance floor crackled softly. Vanessa stepped onto the small stage beside the band with a champagne glass in one hand. Everyone, she called brightly, smiling beneath the chandeliers. Before we cut the cake, I just want to thank all the people who made tonight possible. Guests turned toward the stage immediately. Conversations softened. Cameras lifted. Vanessa's eyes scanned the ballroom dramatically before landing on me. I felt Richard tense beside me. Especially Evelyn. Vanessa continued sweetly, extending one manicured hand in my direction. Because without her generosity, none of us would be enjoying this beautiful evening. Polite applause rippled through the room. I remained perfectly still. Vanessa smiled wider, as the attention settled comfortably around her. Honestly, she laughed lightly into the microphone. Every family should have their own personal sponsor. Several guests laughed quietly. Someone near the bar actually clapped harder. Richard whispered under his breath, "Vanessa, stop." But she was enjoying herself now. Some people cannot resist an audience once cruelty starts feeling entertaining. Vanessa lifted her champagne glass higher. So tonight, she continued brightly, let us raise a toast to the woman who paid for absolutely everything. Laughter spread unevenly across the ballroom. Not everyone joined in this time. I noticed a few guests exchanging uncomfortable glances now. Even Olivia looked uncertain beside the cake table. Slowly, carefully, I placed my folded napkin onto the table beside my untouched champagne glass. Then I stood up. The ballroom grew strangely quiet the moment I stood up. Not completely silent. Glasses still clinked softly somewhere near the bar, and the band continued playing gentle piano music behind Vanessa's speech. But something in the atmosphere shifted almost immediately. People sensed tension the way animals sense storms. Vanessa remained frozen beside the microphone holding her champagne glass midair, her smile flickering slightly as she watched me rise from table 19. Richard stood beside me quickly. "Mom," he whispered under his breath, panic beginning to creep into his voice now. "Please." "Please what?" "Please continue pretending none of this mattered? Please keep swallowing humiliation quietly so everyone else could finish dessert comfortably?" I smoothed the front of my navy dress calmly before looking toward the stage. "You should finish your toast," I said softly. Vanessa laughed nervously into the microphone. "See? Evelyn knows I was only teasing." A few scattered guests chuckled politely, though the laughter sounded weaker now. Forced. Uneasy. Because cruelty becomes harder to enjoy once the target stops playing along. I stepped away from the table slowly and began walking toward the center of the ballroom. My heels moved steadily across the marble floor while hundreds of tiny reflections from the chandeliers shimmered around me. Every eye followed me now. Olivia stared nervously beside the wedding cake while bridesmaids exchanged uncomfortable glances nearby. Even the photographers lowered their cameras slightly. I stopped a few feet from the stage and looked up at Vanessa calmly. "You are right about one thing," I said. My voice was quiet, but the room had become silent enough for everyone to hear it clearly. Vanessa's smile tightened. "Excuse me." I glanced slowly around the ballroom before continuing. "This wedding would not exist without my money." No one moved. Somewhere near the back of the room, a waiter paused with a tray still balanced in his hands. I looked toward Olivia next. "Neither would your college education." Then at Richard. "Or your restaurant after the bankruptcy." Richard's face drained of color immediately. Vanessa lowered her champagne glass slowly. I continued speaking in the same calm tone. No anger. No shouting. Just truth laid carefully across the room like glass. For years, I believed helping my family was an act of love. I touched the edge of the name tag pinned against my dress lightly. Tonight clarified something for me. Vanessa finally found her voice again. Oh my God, Evelyn, do not do this here. Interesting how public humiliation only becomes inappropriate once the wrong person starts speaking. I ignored her completely. You all seemed very comfortable turning generosity into entertainment. A few guests began looking away now. Others stared directly at Vanessa with expressions that had shifted from amusement into discomfort. The room no longer belonged to her. Martin Hale appeared quietly near the ballroom entrance then, standing beside one of the marble columns with a dark folder in his hands. I saw Vanessa notice him almost immediately. Confusion crossed her face first, then uncertainty. Evelyn, Richard said carefully, taking one step toward me. Let us talk privately. I looked at my son for a long moment. Why? So you can explain again why I should stay quiet to protect everyone else. He flinched slightly. That was answer enough. Vanessa forced another brittle laugh into the microphone. This is becoming ridiculous. Martin began walking toward the center of the ballroom. Slow, controlled, deliberate. Guests parted instinctively to let him pass. Actually, he said calmly once he reached the front of the stage, I believe this conversation is long overdue. Vanessa stared at him blankly. Who are you? Martin adjusted his cufflinks lightly before answering. Martin Hale, Robert Carter's attorney. The color disappeared from Richard's face completely then. Olivia looked suddenly frightened beside the cake table. I noticed Vanessa's fingers tightening around the stem of her champagne glass. Martin opened the dark folder slowly while the ballroom remained frozen in absolute silence. Several years before his death, he said evenly, Robert Carter amended the family trust under very specific conditions. Vanessa tried to interrupt him immediately. I really do not think this is the time or place for legal drama. Martin did not even glance at her. One of those conditions involved the public humiliation or manipulation of Mrs. Evelyn Carter. The room became so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the hotel air conditioning above the chandeliers. Then Martin looked directly at Vanessa before calmly adding, Unfortunately for some people in this room, tonight has already been very thoroughly documented. No one spoke after Martin said that. The ballroom seemed suspended in place beneath the chandeliers, frozen somewhere between celebration and collapse. Vanessa still stood on the stage clutching her champagne glass, though her hand no longer looked steady. Richard stared at Martin with an expression I had not seen on my son since childhood. Fear. Real fear strips people down faster than anger ever can. Martin opened the folder slowly and removed several papers before speaking again in the same calm voice. Robert Carter created a morality clause tied to all inheritance distributions within the family trust. Guests exchanged uneasy glances around the ballroom. Someone near the back quietly set down their champagne glass. Martin continued, Any beneficiary found publicly humiliating, manipulating, or intentionally degrading Mrs. Evelyn Carter forfeits their claim. Immediately, Vanessa laughed then, but the sound came out thin and brittle. This is insane. Martin finally looked at her directly. Actually, it is very enforceable. He removed another sheet from the folder, especially when supported by witnesses, recordings, and documented patterns of behavior. Richard went pale beside me. Olivia covered her mouth softly near the cake table. For the first time all evening, no one looked glamorous anymore. They looked exposed. Vanessa stepped down from the stage quickly. Richard, say something. But Richard remained silent. He was staring at the floor now, as though trying to outrun years of choices all at once. Martin calmly handed several copies of the trust amendment to Richard and Olivia before closing the folder again. Robert loved his family very much, he said quietly. But he loved Evelyn more. Something inside my chest tightened painfully hearing that. Because beneath all the humiliation and anger and disappointment tonight, there was still grief. Grief for the man who had seen this coming long before I ever did. Vanessa's composure finally cracked completely. This is ridiculous, she snapped sharply. We were joking. Everyone jokes around at weddings. No one rushed to defend her this time. Not even Olivia. The silence around Vanessa felt heavier than shouting ever could have. Richard looked toward me slowly. Mom, he said weakly, I never wanted this. I studied my son carefully beneath the soft ballroom lights. He looked older suddenly, smaller somehow, like a man realizing too late that passivity can wound people just as deeply as cruelty. But you allowed it, I answered softly. He lowered his eyes immediately. Across the ballroom, several guests quietly began collecting their coats. The celebration had dissolved without anyone formally ending it. The band stopped playing altogether. One violinist slowly packed away her instrument while avoiding eye contact with the family drama unfolding nearby. Olivia walked toward me then, tears gathering in her eyes. "Grandma," she whispered, "I did not think it would go this far." I looked at her beautiful white gown, the flowers in her hair, the makeup beginning to smudge slightly around her eyes. "That was the problem," I said gently. "None of you thought very far at all." She started crying quietly after that. Real tears this time. Not embarrassment. Not discomfort. Understanding. Sometimes the cruelest thing about family betrayal is how ordinary it feels to the people committing it. Martin stepped beside me once more and quietly placed a small silver key into my hand. "Robert wanted you to have this tonight, if things unfolded this way." I frowned slightly. "What is it?" "Safety deposit box. Downtown branch." He smiled faintly for the first time all evening. "There is also a letter inside." My throat tightened instantly. I closed my fingers carefully around the key. Vanessa was still arguing quietly with Richard near the stage now, her sharp whispers echoing through the nearly empty ballroom. But their voices no longer reached me the same way. The noise had finally lost its power. Slowly, I reached up and removed the name tag from my dress. "The old lady who is paying for everything." I stared at the words for one final moment before placing the card gently onto the nearest table beside a half-empty champagne glass. Then I picked up my purse and walked toward the ballroom exit alone. No one tried to stop me this time. Near the doorway, I paused briefly and looked back once more at the collapsing illusion behind me. The flowers, the lights, the expensive decorations I had paid for. All of it suddenly looked strangely small. Robert used to tell me something whenever life disappointed me. Never confuse being needed with being loved. I finally understood what he meant. And as the hotel doors closed quietly behind me, I realized something else too. I had never been the old woman paying for everything. I had been the woman holding their entire world together.